Why is it that some people grow, while others stay stuck in the same destructive patterns year after year? We've all seen it. Some people evolve. They become more self-aware, more grounded, more whole. They face their struggles head-on, learn from their mistakes, and come out wiser. But others? They stay locked in cycles of blame, denial, manipulation, or self-sabotage, never really changing, just repeating the same story in different disguises. Why? The answer lies deeper than motivation or intelligence. It's about how we relate to discomfort. Real growth demands something most people run from: honest self-reflection. It requires admitting hard truths about who we are, what we've done, and what we've been avoiding. And let's be honest, that's uncomfortable. That's vulnerable. It challenges the version of ourselves we've worked so hard to build. And for many people, that is the deal breaker. Change means looking in the mirror and seeing the parts of ourselves we'd rather not face. Our fears, our flaws, our contradictions. That takes courage. That takes humility. And in a culture that prizes strength, confidence, and success, vulnerability often feels like weakness. So instead of confronting the shadow, people protect their ego at all costs. They justify, blame, deflect, and stay stuck. But here's the truth. The people who grow aren't better or smarter. They're just braver. They're willing to sit in the discomfort. They choose truth over comfort. And that one choice, it changes everything. When people hear the word shadow, they usually think of something dark, evil, or dangerous. Rage, greed, jealousy, cruelty. But Carl Jung's concept of the shadow goes much deeper than just labeling parts of ourselves as bad. The shadow isn't just about evil. It's about everything we've pushed away, buried, or been taught to reject. It's the parts of ourselves we were told weren't acceptable. Our anger, our sensitivity, our ambition, our pain, even our strength. Maybe you grew up being told to stay quiet, so now you suppress your voice. Maybe you were taught that being vulnerable makes you weak, so you lock away your emotions. Over time, these parts don't just disappear. They go underground, and once they're in the dark, they don't die. They grow. The shadow lives in our unconscious, and it shows up in ways we don't always recognize. In toxic habits, emotional outbursts, self-sabotage, anxiety, even in who we're drawn to or repelled by. It's not just the ugly side of us, it's the unseen side. And the longer we avoid it, the more power it has over our lives. The truth is, we all carry a shadow. It's not something to fear, it's something to understand. Because when we don't face it, it controls us. But when we do face it, something incredible happens. We begin to feel whole again. We stop hiding from ourselves. We gain clarity, self-respect, and a kind of inner strength that isn't fake or forced. It's real. Owning your shadow isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming honest. And in a world full of masks and performance, that kind of honesty is rare and powerful. You don't have to believe in psychology to see the shadow at work. It shows up in real life every single day. It's in the passive-aggressive comments we make without thinking. It's in the jealousy we feel but pretend isn't there. It's in the way we sabotage relationships, chase the wrong people, or explode over things that seem minor. That's not just random behavior. That's the shadow talking. The parts of ourselves we've buried don't just sit quietly in the background. They find ways to leak out, in our moods, our habits, our choices, even our dreams. Ever notice how you keep attracting the same kind of toxic person over and over again? Or how you lash out at others for things you secretly hate about yourself? That's not coincidence, it's projection. It's your shadow trying to get your attention. The uncomfortable truth is, we all carry emotional baggage, old wounds, suppressed feelings, unresolved fears. And the more we try to avoid them, the more they control us from behind the scenes. That's why people can have everything on the outside, success, money, a nice house, and still feel empty or anxious. Because you can't outrun the parts of yourself you haven't faced. You can't fake inner peace. The shadow is like a mirror we keep turning away from. But sooner or later, it finds a way to reflect back at us. Through conflict, through breakdowns, through repeating the same painful lessons until we finally pay attention. It's not there to punish us. It's there to wake us up. And once we start listening, we realize the shadow isn't something to fear. It's the part of us that's been waiting to be understood. So, why do some people avoid change, even when it's obvious their lives are falling apart? Why do they keep repeating the same patterns, making the same mistakes, and pushing away the very things that could help them grow? The answer isn't laziness or stupidity, it's fear. Real change isn't just about fixing bad habits, it's about facing who we really are underneath the surface. And for a lot of people, that's terrifying. Growth forces us to look at the uncomfortable parts of ourselves, our insecurities, our regrets, our failures, the things we've done that we'd rather forget. It means admitting that we've been wrong, that maybe we've hurt people, sabotaged opportunities, or lived behind a mask for so long, we don't even know who we really are anymore. That kind of honesty cuts deep. It cracks the identity we've spent years trying to build, the version of ourselves that looks good, feels strong, and seems in control. And let's be real. In American culture, we're taught to value confidence, strength, independence, not vulnerability. Admitting weakness, that feels like defeat. So instead, people protect their egos. They justify their behavior, they point fingers. They double down on the same old stories because the alternative, rewriting their narrative, feels like emotional suicide. Changing means breaking down before you can rebuild. It means sitting with discomfort instead of escaping it. It means letting go of who you thought you were in order to become who you actually are. And most people don't want to do that. Not because they're bad people, but because staying stuck feels safer than stepping into the unknown. But here's the irony. The longer you resist change, the harder life becomes. The truth you're avoiding doesn't go away. It just shows up louder, messier, and more painful until you're forced to face it. The people who grow aren't fearless, they're just willing to face the fear. And that one decision, that's where transformation begins. The biggest obstacle to growth isn't fear, it's the ego. The ego is that inner voice that says, I've got this, even when everything is falling apart. It's the identity we build to feel in control, to feel worthy, to protect ourselves from pain. But here's the thing, the ego doesn't care about truth, it cares about comfort. And when that comfort is threatened, the ego fights back hard. It starts defending itself with everything it's got. Excuses, denial, blame, even aggression. If someone calls us out, we don't listen, we defend. If something hurts, we don't feel it, we numb it. If we're wrong, we spin the story until we feel right again. The ego's job is to protect our self-image, but in doing so, it can also block us from becoming who we're meant to be. The more fragile someone's ego is, the more they cling to it, and the more fiercely they reject anything that challenges it. That's why pride and stubbornness often go hand in hand with emotional immaturity. The stronger the ego grip, the less room there is for growth. Because change requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels like weakness to a mind that's addicted to control. But here's the truth. Real strength isn't about never being wrong. It's about being brave enough to admit when you are. The ego resists that because it sees humility as a threat, but in reality, humility is the doorway to growth. Until we loosen the ego's grip, we'll keep pushing away the very truths that could set us free. And the longer we hold on to a false self, the further we drift from our real one. One of the most dangerous ways the ego protects itself is through projection. It's one of those sneaky defense mechanisms most people don't even realize they're doing. Instead of owning what's uncomfortable inside us, our fears, insecurities, or flaws, we push them onto other people. We accuse others of being the very things we refuse to see in ourselves. The liar calls everyone else dishonest. The insecure person calls others weak. The person full of resentment labels everyone else toxic. It's not conscious. It's psychological self-preservation. If we can't handle the truth about who we are, we try to see it somewhere else, anywhere else, just not in the mirror. The problem is, over time, this behavior becomes so automatic that we start to believe our own illusions. We're not just fooling others anymore, we're fooling ourselves. That's the real danger. Projection doesn't just damage our relationships, it keeps us disconnected from reality. And the more disconnected we become, the harder it is to grow. Because how can you heal a wound you won't admit is there? How can you change a behavior you won't even recognize as your own? It's easier to point fingers than to do the hard work of self-reflection. But the truth is, the people who irritate us the most often reveal something hidden within us, something we haven't fully owned. That's the gift of projection if we're willing to see it. It shows us where we need to look, but most people don't. They keep blaming, judging, deflecting, and in doing so, they stay stuck in a loop. If you want to grow, pay attention to who triggers you, because that's often where your shadow lives. Not everyone avoids change because they're scared. Some people resist it because they've grown comfortable in their darkness, and even learned to use it as a weapon. Manipulation, control, dominance, these traits can bring power, success, and influence, especially in a world that often rewards results over integrity. For some, the shadow isn't something to be healed. It's a tool, and if it gets them what they want, why give it up? To them, compassion is weakness, and vulnerability is a liability. They've convinced themselves that kindness is naive, honesty is foolish, and morality is just a limitation for the soft-hearted. These people don't just deny their shadow. They embrace it, wear it like armor, and call it strength. And the longer they operate this way, the more it becomes their identity. Power becomes addictive, control becomes intoxicating, and any threat to that feels like weakness. That's why some people don't change. Not because they can't, but because they don't want to. They've fallen in love with the very darkness that's slowly consuming them. And when the shadow becomes your identity, the idea of healing starts to feel like losing. At first, living through your shadow can feel like power. You get what you want. You control the narrative. You stay 2 steps ahead of everyone else. People respect you or fear you. And sometimes, that's enough. But here's the part most people miss. That kind of power comes at a cost. The more you dominate others, the more you start to fear being dominated yourself. The more control you have, the more paranoid you become about losing it. On the surface, everything might look like success. The job title, the status, the confidence. But inside, it's hollow, because no amount of power can fill the emptiness that comes from being disconnected from your true self. The shadow might help you climb the ladder, but it won't bring you peace. In fact, it does the opposite. It makes you restless, distrustful, constantly looking over your shoulder. You're not leading, you're surviving. And the scary part? You may not even realize how far you've drifted from who you really are until it's too late. The very traits that once felt like your edge become your cage. That's the trap. When you build your identity around control, success becomes just another form of fear, the fear of losing it. Real growth doesn't come from pretending to be perfect. It comes from having the courage to get honest with yourself. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole by integrating the parts of yourself you've rejected, denied, or buried deep in the shadows. It's not about getting rid of your darkness. It's about understanding it, owning it, and choosing how you want to live with it. Most people think healing means becoming better or more polished, but real healing means becoming more real. It means embracing your contradictions, your strength and your softness, your confidence and your fear, your light and your shadow, and learning to live in alignment with all of it. That's what individuation is, the lifelong process of discovering who you really are beneath the masks, the roles, and the stories you've carried. And yes, it's hard. It takes humility, self-awareness, and brutal honesty. But on the other side of that discomfort is something powerful: clarity, confidence, and inner freedom. You stop being ruled by old wounds or unconscious patterns. You stop chasing validation. You stop living a life that doesn't feel like your own. You don't become perfect. You become whole. And that's where real power lives. Most people never walk the path of real transformation. Not because they don't want to grow, but because the process is brutal. It's not a quick fix or a feel-good slogan. It's a breakdown before it's a breakthrough. It requires ego death, the unraveling of the stories we've told ourselves to feel in control, to feel worthy, to feel good enough. You have to face the parts of you that you've worked hard to hide: your mistakes, your pride, your shame, your pain. That level of honesty isn't just uncomfortable, it's soul deep. And that's why most people pull back. They start the journey, but when it gets heavy, they retreat. They'd rather hold on to their illusions than face the raw truth. Because once you see yourself clearly, you can't unsee it. And that kind of awareness demands change. It demands responsibility. It demands a new way of living. For those who've built their entire identity around control, pride, or image, that's a terrifying idea. But without that courage, growth stays just a concept, never a reality. Real transformation isn't soft or pretty, it's fierce. And only those willing to walk through the fire ever get to the other side. Avoiding your shadow might feel easier in the short term, but eventually, you pay the price. The parts of yourself you refuse to face don't just disappear, they build pressure beneath the surface. And sooner or later, that pressure finds a way out. It shows up in anxiety, toxic habits, failed relationships, burnout, or even physical illness. You start wondering why you're always angry, why you feel disconnected, why nothing ever feels fulfilling, even when life should be good. That's not bad luck. That's the shadow trying to get your attention. Repressed emotions don't stay buried forever. They leak into everything. You might become passive when you really need to speak up, cold and distant when you actually crave connection, or explosive over things that shouldn't bother you. It's all the pain you've shoved down, fighting to be seen. And the longer you avoid it, the messier it gets. You can't outrun the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. They will shape your life, whether you face them or not. So, the question isn't if the shadow will show up, it's how, and whether you'll have the courage to meet it before it wrecks everything you've worked so hard to build. At the end of the day, we all face a choice. Do we keep running from our inner darkness, or do we finally face it? The shadow isn't your enemy, it's your mirror. It holds the parts of you you've buried, rejected, or been too afraid to confront. But here's the truth. What you don't face will eventually shape you. And it's not just about psychology. It's about how you live, love, work, and lead. You can spend your whole life protecting your ego, blaming others, staying comfortable, and still feel empty. Or you can choose the harder path, the one that forces you to get real with yourself, to own your flaws, and to grow from them. That path won't be easy. It demands courage, honesty, and a willingness to walk through discomfort. But it's the only path that leads to freedom, real freedom. Because once you stop running, you stop pretending, you stop hiding, you stop living someone else's version of your life. The people who grow aren't perfect. They're just brave enough to face what most people run from. So ask yourself, are you protecting your comfort or stepping into your truth? If this message hit home, don't just nod and move on. Pause, reflect. Ask yourself, what part of me have I been hiding? What have I buried just to feel safe or stay in control? That's where the real work begins. The truth is, most people spend their entire lives running from the very parts of themselves that could set them free. But you're not most people. If you've made it this far, something in you is ready to break the pattern, face the discomfort, and grow into something real. This journey isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. And that starts by getting honest with yourself. So here's your challenge. Start paying attention to what triggers you. Watch where you blame. Notice where you hide. These are breadcrumbs leading straight to your shadow, and facing it might be the most powerful thing you'll ever do. If you're serious about growth, don't just chase positivity. Chase truth, because that's where freedom lives. If this resonated, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, or share this with someone who's ready to dig deeper. We explore topics like this every day, because real self-awareness isn't a trend, it's a lifestyle.